The Soviets wanted to go fast, not necessarily for setting speed records, but to gain an advantage in pursuing inconvenient individuals using powerful cars. Of course, there was a V8 for the purpose, but when they learned about a groundbreaking rotary engine that offered high power potential at a fraction of the weight, they got to work. Wankel's invention was considered a marvel in the 1960s, and everyone believed that it was the future, including the Soviets, who became extremely enthusiastic about it. Following the first patent in 1934, Wankel completed his invention in the late 1950s, and the first cars to feature this type of engine were produced by NSU. The automotive industry became extremely enthusiastic, and every major automotive and engineering company sought to obtain a license. It appeared as though a revolution was on the horizon in the automotive world. In theory, it was a very straightforward design, with just a rotor moving in an eccentric manner within a housing, accompanied by a collection of gaskets. This remarkably simple design had very few moving parts. Dozens of licenses were sold, and even the Soviets expressed interest in the simpler rotary piston engine. However, in the Eastern Bloc, licenses didn't hold the same weight, and according to John B. Hege, the book author of the Wankel's rotor engine history, there is no record of any licenses being issued to Soviet companies. The same situation applied to Škoda, which also conducted experiments with the rotary engine. But first, a huge shout out to all my Patreons supporting this channel. Feel free to join them to keep the channel growing. Thank you. So, why were the Soviets interested in the rotary engine in the first place? There were several reasons, but the most significant one was that the State Secret Service and the government always preferred to have faster cars than the general public. The Wankel engine appeared to be the ideal choice. It was compact, exceptionally lightweight, and offered substantial horsepower. Additionally, it operated smoothly, free of vibrations, and provided easier steering compared to the heavy cast iron piston engines. Though they were yet to find out its limitations in terms of torque and reliability. The USSR went to great lengths to develop rotary engines, establishing a dedicated rotary development bureau, the SKP RPD. Since they didn't have a license for the technology, they had to obtain rotary engines from the other sources for reverse engineering. It's been suggested that the Soviets studied the workings of the Mazda engines, which would make sense given the communist reputation for such practices. The work began in the 1970s, with the first concept engine, the VAS 301, appearing in 1973. However, it was horrible and needed substantial improvements. By 1978, the first engine ready for car testing was the VAS 311, a 0.6-liter single rotor producing 70 horsepower and 95 Nm of torque, which was a decent power jump from a 60 horsepower four-cylinder. These engines were installed in the first batch of 50 VAS automobiles, which were given to ordinary Soviet workers. Yet, within just 6 months, all but one of these engines failed. Many didn't even make it to the first oil change at 10,000 kilometers, and the engine's lifespan seemed to peak at around 20,000 kilometers. The failure occurred on the bearings, apex seals, and due to the imbalance of the single rotor. Additionally, the fuel consumption was roughly double that of the four-cylinder engines. The engine's compression ratio of 9.5 to 1 was also exceptionally high for the fuel standards in the Eastern Bloc, requiring the use of a high-octane 93-run fuel, which was not widely available at the time. It was a disappointment, but the work continued. In 1982, a new prototype was introduced, and this time, the single-rotor concept was abandoned in favor of a more powerful two-rotor design. The VAZ 411 had a displacement of 1.3 liters and reportedly produced 120 horsepower at 6,000 rpm. The KGB's cars received this engine and they appreciated the power it provided, not caring much about fuel and oil economy. The later VAZ 413 saw an increase in power to 140 horsepower and torque from 147 to 186 Nm. The management decided to produce a limited series of 200 units for the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the KGB. These engines were installed in Volgas and other gas automobiles. The Soviets were deeply intrigued by the rotary engine concept and explored beyond the conventional single and two-rotor designs. The VAZ 431 was a three-rotor engine equivalent to Mazda's 20B, delivering 210 horsepower and 280 Nm of torque. This engine was installed in GAZ 31028 and GAZ 14 vehicles for testing purposes. Despite its weight of 200 kilograms, it remained lighter and more powerful than a heavy cast iron 5.5-liter V8. There were also 280 horsepower 3-rotor and 350 horsepower 4-rotor versions designed for large limousines, never intended for ordinary consumers. Peak power was achieved between 5500 to 6000 rpm. An aviation version of the 3-rotor engine, the VAZ 426, was made of aluminum and featured large peripheral ports on the intake and exhaust sides. Designed for helicopters, it produced 240 horsepower and 330 Nm of torque, with an experimental version reaching 350 horsepower. A two-rotor variant called the VAZ 416 with 160 horsepower was also developed for lightweight aeroplanes. The rotary engines may have not been available to the general public, but its engineers had the opportunity to explore a wide range of applications beyond automotive use. They created motorsport versions and participated in domestic and international autocross events with all-wheel drive bogies powered by two-rotor engines, and even considered developing a three-rotor variant. The incredible scale of the rotary engines was made, ranging from as small as 45 horsepower single-rotor engines to more powerful 2, 3 and even 400 horsepower 4-rotor engines used in airplanes, helicopters, boats and hovercrafts. There were reports of a twin-turbo 4-rotor engine generating 680 horsepower, intended for a 5-ton amphibious APC, although it never entered production. Interestingly, during a new generation of front-wheel drive cars, the Soviets managed to install the rotary engines in the Lada Samara as well. These engines produce 140 horsepower and 186 Nm of torque. While their peak power was around 6000 rpm, they could rev up to 8000. The goal was to achieve an overall reliability target of 100 to 125,000 kilometers. However, Soviet rotary engines consumed about 14 to 15 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers and typically required overhauls after reaching 30 to 40,000 kilometers, although some sources mention a possible 100,000 kilometer mileage. These cars were produced in limited quantities for ordinary consumers, but they remained rare due to the engine's challenging maintenance requirements, which became widely known by then. The development of the first RPD rotary engine began in 1973 and production continued until 2001, making it one of the longest-running rotary engine development projects. However, In 2004, by order of the general director of Avtovaz, the special bureau responsible for this project was liquidated, marking the definitive end of this era of rotary engine development in the Soviet Union.